The next thing that occurred with the endothelial cell was when Robert Vogel, chairman of cardiology at University of Maryland, took a healthy group of subjects to a certain fast food restaurant, which is characterized by arches, which are golden. And half of the group got the cornflakes, and the other group had hash browns and sausage. The group that had the group that had the cornflakes, brachial artery tourniquet test, normal. The group that had the hash browns and sausage, within 120 minutes after that meal, they couldn't dilate the artery. That single meal had so trashed, so injured, so compromised the ability of their endothelial cells to make nitric oxide, they didn't have enough to dilate the artery. However, being young, as they followed them into the late afternoon, early evening, they began to recover. But you and I know that the next morning for breakfast, it'll probably be scrambled eggs and bacon. Lunchtime, we'll have white bread with mayonnaise and cold cuts. And at supper time, baked potato with sour cream, lamb chops, vegetables soaked in butter, ranch dressing on a salad, ice cream for dessert. Here in the good old USA, starting as kids, in our childhood, all day long, we absolutely hammer, injure, and destroy the ability of our endothelial cells to make nitric oxide. So when we have this epidemic of disease, cardiovascular disease in our 50s, 60s, and 70s, we've been working on that since we were kids. Now, what I'm going to show you next is what a good speaker is supposed to do, is tell you beforehand what they're going to tell you, then they tell you, then they show you another slide that tells you what he told you. So these are the functions of nitric oxide that we've just gone over. And we don't have time today to go over all of these wonderful natural protective mechanisms that we have, but we are spending time on one of them, the endothelial cell, which I know you're going to understand. Now, but to put your mind at ease about the others that I'm not going to spend time on, all of these, absolutely every single one of these defense mechanisms is absolutely optimized when you're eating whole food plant-based nutrition. So now let's get into where the rubber hits the road. You got to do a study. You can't just go out on the circuit with hype and snake oil. You got to do the research. The science is where you're going to get your credibility. That's absolutely key. Now, this was in 1985, and I still had all my surgical obligations, so this was a small study. But all of these persons did have severe triple vessel cardiovascular disease. They had failed their first or second bypass, they had failed their first or second angioplasty, or they were too sick for these procedures, or they had refused, and 5 were told by their expert cardiologist they would not live out the year. Now, my concern was that as a general surgeon, seeing these significantly ill patients with cardiovascular disease, my concern was how was I going to get them to be compliant? How will they adhere? Because to make this work, it had to be 100%, and this is a highly significant lifestyle change. So the mantra that I decided to use for these first group of patients was the same mantra that I had been using for my cancer patients that I had learned years ago from a wonderful West Coast surgeon by the name of Bert Dunphy. And Bert used to say that patients with cancer are not afraid to suffer. Patients with cancer are not afraid to die. But patients with cancer are afraid of being abandoned by their family or by their physician. So the first 5 years of the study, I saw every one of these patients every 2 weeks in the office. We drew their cholesterol, we checked their blood pressure, their weight, and I went over every morsel they ate. At the end of 5 years, I got more courageous, and I started seeing them once a month. And then at the end of a decade, they were now pretty well on autopilot. So I stretched it out to quarterly. And then at 12 years, we wrote this up in the scientific literature, which makes it one of the longest, if not the longest, study of its type, 12 years, which is almost half a career. But it was exciting, and I'm going to share, first of all, with you the foods that we know now injure the endothelium, and these were the foods I didn't want these patients to have. Not a drop of any kind of oil. Olive oil, corn oil, soybean oil, safflower oil, sunflower oil, coconut oil, palm oil, oil in a cracker, oil in a piece of bread, oil in a salad dressing, no oil. And nothing with the mother or her face. Meat, fish, chicken, fowl, turkey, and eggs, and no dairy, milk, cream, butter, cheese, ice cream, and yogurt. And I don't like sugar or caffeinated coffee. And for the patients that have heart disease, I've asked them to withhold nuts and avocado. Now, in my book, yes, patients who do not have heart disease do have nuts. They do have avocado. And there's a number who have taken issue with me on my stance on nuts. And I'll just spend a moment there. First of all, let me just say how much I respect everybody in this movement, how I respect their science and their results. And I hope they do the same, because with the program that we have presently, we got a winner. When patients do it, we stop their disease, and we often get reversal. So I'm a little bit old-fashioned. The reason I don't like nuts, I think it's probably fine if you have 3 walnut halves on your cereal. I don't think that would hurt anything. But that's not what people would hear. They say Esselstyn was down at Melville, and he said nuts were okay. So yeah, this is about one of the more addicting foods you can find. If they hear that, though, the nuts were going to be in the glove compartment. They'll be in the bathroom, the kitchen, the bedroom, the hallway, the workbench. And then what have we got? This avalanche of saturated fat. And I have yet to see a single study in the scientific literature where they have taken patients seriously ill with heart disease and let them have peanut butter and nuts, all they want, and cashew sauce, and ever see the results of arrest and reversal of disease. So we're still waiting for that. I would be probably quite open-minded if I could see that study, but I think the amount of saturated fat in that situation would probably work against us. And as I say, right now, we got a winner. It's hard for me to leave that. So, now, what are you going to eat? Well, we'll come to that too. But first, I know some of you have been nervous when I say no oil. Here is a peer-reviewed scientific study. Olive, soybean, and palm oil intake have a similar acute detrimental effect over the endothelial function in healthy young subjects. If you'd like more on this, earlier last year, in the inaugural issue of the International Journal of Disease Prevention and Reversal, I wrote an article entitled, "Is Oil Healthy?" And I go through the animal studies and the human studies showing how oil injures endothelial cells. Okay. Now, this is some very interesting work that'll give you a good argument if you get into somebody who's trying to push keto or paleo or Atkins on you. This is lecithin and carnitine. Those molecules are found in the animal products that you see listed underneath. And Stan Hazen, who did this research at our institution, was looking particularly at omnivores, because when you feed, when you feed an omnivore these animal products, they contain bacteria in their microbiome, in their gut, that when they metabolize on lecithin and carnitine, they produce a molecule called MAO. MAO. And what happens is, rapidly, MAO is oxidized by your liver. So now we have TMAO, trimethylamine oxide. And here's the schematic of this, if you'd like to see it. You start with lecithin and carnitine in the animal products. The omnivore has gut bacteria which can metabolize lecithin and carnitine to trimethylamine oxide, which then leads to vascular disease. But the exciting thing, to me, that what Stan found, when he took a person who was totally plant-based, and gave them a lamb chop and measured their blood, no TMAO. Why? Because persons who are totally plant-based do not contain the bacteria in their gut to convert lecithin and carnitine to TMAO to injure your blood vessel. Now, and sadly, if you keep eating that lamb chop as a plant-based person 4 or 5 days, now you begin to convert your microbiome to that more lethal colony of bacteria.